Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Joe Lalo, and I'm here with Jeffrey Poole and Lindsay Broger. So today we're going to be talking about diversifying income with Patreon and audiobooks, and more importantly, we're going to be discussing that with Abigail Hilton. I'm going to go through her intro now, and then we're going to move into the questions. Abigail is a traveling nurse anesthetist and has spent time in veterinary school and lived in Taiwan and skinned rattlesnakes. She's the author of the Prophet of Panamandora series, among other books, and has published a number of her stories as audiobooks. Hello, Abigail. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
We're going to start off just with a few, just standard intro questions. Less standard for you, I guess, because you have got an interesting story to tell. Tell us about your books and what led you from rattlesnake skinning to self-publishing.
Well, it was pretty much a direct line of travel. I didn't know everyone didn't get there that way. I've been writing books since I was a teenager. I think like a lot of us, and I was always kind of content to have a small audience. So I don't know, that was maybe not to my benefit, but I like audiobooks, so started podcasting them around 2008. And then the Kindle revolution hit in 2010, 2009, 2010, and I discovered people would also pay money for them, which was very exciting. And so yeah, I've just sort of gradually moved into a lot of different stuff. I like visual art. My books are often illustrated, which I can tell you, interior illustration does not actually sell books, but it's an awful lot of fun, and it does improve retention. People do like the pictures, but yeah, you can spend a lot of money on interior illustration without actually increasing your sales, which is not astonishing. But I've also gotten into comics now. I've got a Patreon that's selling a comic related to one of my books. I've worked with a number of illustrators. I have one main illustrator that we've worked together for like 8 years now. And yeah, that's me. I've got stuff available in pretty much all the different mediums.
Cool. I can say I know a fair amount about how illustration is a great way to spend money and not perhaps a great way to make it. You want to know an even better way to not make money but get cool stuff. You can't quite see it. I should bring it up one of these days. Up here in the corner, I have a row of figurines. They have no merchandise potential. They're just characters I wanted to see made.
Yeah, you can see some of the artwork on the walls of my house are covered in illustrations from my books, and they're really, really beautiful. I recently did a horror book, which was pretty successful. Lots of people liked it, but yeah, it's a really slow return on investment. It's not something that pays off fast. I do some children's books as well. I've got a series about a baby rat that makes friends with a snake, and they have kind of an unlikely friendship. And then Hunter's Unlucky is an animal epic that's actually currently my best-selling series. It got lucky enough to be featured in an Audible sale about a month ago, and sold about 2,200 copies, which was pretty awesome since I'd only sold 600 audiobooks before then.
Wow.
And well so it paid for its production costs and then went right on into the black, so that was cool.
Good stuff. So, speaking of writing for younger readers, would you say that what were some of the challenges for that?
For writing for, say that again?
Younger readers.
Those books, and there's 2 of them so far, and my plan is to do half a dozen of them and then do the audio version because it'll be longer. They're short and punchy, so the whole story is about 6,000 words, and then they're divided into chapters that are about 600 words apiece. So there's no fluff. Like the story, it's an actual story with, beginning, middle, and an end, and actually some subplots. but so they just have to keep moving. And I don't know. I'll kick an idea around for several years, and then I'll write it in a week. But I don't know. They're tighter stories, and I don't decide until after I've written something what age group it's really for. And I was really, I mean, actually, my fans have actual children, some of whom have read these books and who like these books, and so I got really excited when actual children enjoyed them.
That's cool. Yeah. So children are unforgiving of poor pace.
I would say that's probably true. You kind of need to, yeah. There's not a lot of room for fluff. Lose them.
All right. Well, now that we've got your background laid out, I'm going to hand you off to Lindsay, and we're going to start talking about some of the other topics.
All right. Hi, Abby. Nice to talk with you.
Yeah, you as well.
One of the reasons I was interested in having you on the show is on a forum we're on, you did this really big write-up on Patreon and kind of your own experiences and also what you're seeing with other artists and authors out there using the platform. So I was kind of curious we haven't really talked about it on the show too much. I was wondering if you could explain what it is, just to start out with for our listeners.
So Patreon, in medical terms, Patreon is chronic and Kickstarter is acute. So Kickstarter is to raise money for one specific thing, and when you finish raising the money for that thing, you're done. For Patreon, you're raising money for something that is never ending. So things like podcasts, things like comics, if you can properly sell it to your audience, things like your never-ending fantasy series. So it's a good platform for that sort of thing. So for Patreon, people are signing up to give usually a monthly donation. In some cases, you can also set it up to pay per thing. So you can set it up to pay per podcast episode or something like that. But it makes more sense to me for a lot of projects to set it up monthly. Also, as a Patreon donor, I'm less nervous about monthly because, what if they make 10 things this month and I get charged 10 times? So, but there's all kinds of ways you can put caps on it. But yeah, it pays out on an ongoing basis, and you are asking people to sign up for a monthly bill. So at least in my experience, I think it's a little bit harder to get people to sign up for that than a one-shot kind of thing. But what it gives you is a predictable ongoing budget. So I'm using it to fund a comic. And at this point, the comic is right now, it's black and white, and it's every other week, so we started off nice and slow. But it's completely funded by the Patreon, and actually, it's a little bit, we're actually in a lovely place in between goals, so I'm making a little bit more money than I need to pay my artist, but I don't owe them another step up reward yet. So it's really handy for stuff like that, and I especially admire Tim Pratt, the way he's doing his Patreon. He writes a short story every month for his patrons, and I love his short stories, so I got all excited when I saw it. But he makes I think better than you would probably make sending them to a magazine. The people who like his stories are paying him on an ongoing basis. So there's all kinds of ways that you could use it to fund things that don't have a termination, that are ongoing, that are chronic.
All right. I remember when I actually did Kickstarter myself, probably 3 years ago now, when I was trying to pay for my audiobooks. I did those are a couple $1,000s, if not more, for a good-sized fantasy novel, and it was successful, but it was also kind of a lot of work in that, at first you got to get people to donate, and then you have to do what you said you're going to do and give out ship the rewards. I had all these signed paperbacks going all over the place, and if you do any other kind of rewards, of course, it's more time-consuming too. So I was wondering, I guess with Kickstarter, it feels like it's almost like a crowdfunding thing. I guess it is a crowdfunding thing. So they're actually, they're paying for you to do this thing, whereas with Patreon, it sounds like you can get paid whether or not you give them anything extra or not. Yeah. I guess I've seen authors who just maybe do updates now and then, but they're not giving a short story. They're just publishing their regular stuff. Is that what you've seen, or what do you think about that?
So I've seen two basic kinds of Patreons, and they both work. In fact, I have one of each. I have a semi-secret nonfiction podcast, and then I've got my fiction stuff. And the one way is to do basically a tip jar. And you would be surprised how willing people are to give to a tip jar if they really like what you're doing. And the assumption there is you're just going to use that money to support yourself or as capital for your business or whatever. Like, you don't have to account for all of the money. It's patronage. And then the other way is to do basically a little mini Kickstarter, and those tend to fund much higher from what I've seen, but they're also more work to run. My fiction one is set up like that, and it was a lot of work to set up. Once it's ticking along, it's not too much extra work, but part of the reason is that the milestone goals are mostly things that my artist has to make, and all I have to do is pay her, and then she goes off and makes them. But yeah, for that one, if it's set up like a little Kickstarter, then you've got tiered patronage levels, and they get a little bit more if they give $5 a month versus $10 a month versus $20 a month. And then also, for mine at least, and for other successful ones I've seen, something special happens when you hit a milestone goal. So when you hit $100 a month, you give everybody at every tier an extra little something. And when you hit $500 a month, everybody at every tier gets an extra little something. And if you really want to get them excited, make those steps fairly small so that when people see you're like $10 from another milestone reward, they want to get you up over the edge. And so like for mine, for the smaller levels, it was things like chibi drawings of different characters, and then we're to the point now where the last one was a wallpaper of 2 characters of their choice. So my people at the $5, no, it's the $3 and up level got to vote, and they voted on characters from my entire story worlds, which of course they picked 2 from 2 different worlds, and my artist put them interacting together on a digital wallpaper, and they all got to have that. So that was just the reward that we got for hitting a particular milestone. But it's predictable capital that you've got for your business, and in my experience, the amounts don't go up and down very much. I mean, obviously people could cancel their donations at any time. They can scroll back their donations, like they can say, oh, that was really too much to donate, I'm going to move from $10 to $5. But they don't, at least what I've seen so far, they don't do that very often, and they tend to send you letters apologizing when they do. So it's fairly predictable monthly income, and it grows slowly over time as people come along and get interested in what you're doing and sign up.
Sounds cool. Yeah, I know I've heard from Joanna Penn talking on her show saying that like a big part of it is that she really enjoys the community that she's built, because it's like she has a closer relationship to these people than just her standard audience who might never email or anything. Have you had that experience with your? It sounds like you have with your patrons, patron, whatever they're called, the people that donate.
Joanna Penn has a much bigger audience than I do. I've got 47 patrons at this point, and most of them are hardcore fans that I've known for a long time. They will, they certainly get excited when I post something interesting on there, but most of them are people that also interact with me on other social media. Yeah, I don't know. I think that so Kickstarter has a whole community of people that will kind of go through Kickstarters and look for interesting ones to support, right? Patreon does not have that kind of, the search is still really crummy. Like when I go on there trying to find other interesting campaigns to sort of emulate, I find that even if you're looking for something, sometimes it doesn't, like somebody will point me at an interesting campaign, I'll be like, wow, why have I never seen that before? Why didn't my search for epic fantasy author turn up this person that's doing really well and whose campaign I might want to emulate? But their search is just really crummy. So the result is that for the most part, you're bringing people to Patreon. They're not finding you accidentally on there. So usually, at least so far with me, they're people that I already interact with in other places. Not as some people would imagine your family, friends, and beta readers. Family, friends, and beta readers tend to feel they're already doing enough to support you. They do not support you on Patreon. It's the actual readers that will do that. But I've found that I bring them there, not vice versa. But your mileage may vary. Also, what they're supporting is rather different than a podcast. So I think it also depends on the art that you're making for them, how they respond to it.
All right, yeah, I would never tell my family and friends. I think I'd be mortified if my dad was like, "Hey, I better chip in $5 every month so the electricity stays on there."
Yeah. Oh, I have had a few people like chip in $1. I'm like, you shouldn't have to do that. And they're like, well, I want to see the stuff. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, I would have showed it to you if you'd asked. Like, well, you'll forget to send it. I'm like, yeah, I will. I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah, I'm curious as somebody who's seen some of the art people doing it. I know there's a gal that does like just really fast I say it's a Disney style art. I guess it's comics or something, or comic art, and she also teaches in addition to providing new stuff. And I swear she makes like 40,000 every 2 weeks or something. It's just that's at one end of the spectrum. Do you feel that authors are able to, because we're not as visual, maybe? Well, of course, you sound like you have a great way around that with having an artist do stuff. But with authors, do you think it can work? Yeah. Do you think it works as well when you're offering text?
If people like you enough, I think so. I mean, like I said, I was really excited about Tim Pratt's Patreon. And I think maybe a short story author, it might work better. Although, I don't know. Let's see. Who else do I follow? I follow Ursula Vernon on there. And I love Ursula Vernon stuff. And hers is just a tip jar. And I can't remember how much it is. I think it's something like $500 a month. It's a substantial amount of capital for your business. It's also worth noting you end up with about 90% of that. And it goes up and down a little bit. Like, there's a small advantage in having a few people giving a lot of money than a lot of people giving a little bit of money, because you pay a small amount per transaction. So a smaller number of transactions will net you more. But it's a very minor difference. Like, it ends up being about 90%.
Yeah, and it's good to think too about just if you got a couple $100 a month, if you can count on that every month, that can be a big difference. I know I've stumbled across Sharon Lee on there from the Liaden books. They've been like publishing them since like the 80s. And with traditional publishing, you're only getting paid every 6 months usually, and you never know what it's going to be. So I think they're making a couple extra thousand a month. So it really seems like that's very helpful income for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's enough to start a whole new project. That's enough to make a comic, make an audiobook, all kinds of things.
All right. Well, let me hand it to the guys too. I know they have some questions as well.
Yep. We talked a bit about this, but I support a couple of Patreon pages, mostly artists, and I find that Patreon seems to primarily be focused, on rapidly recurring things, like, as you say, webcomics and podcasts. For people who aren't producing that, let's put it this way: for people who are subscribed, they're subscribed, usually on a monthly basis. So, would you say it's really best for somebody who could put out at least one thing per month, or do you think that people who have, a normal book release a schedule of 2 or 3 months per book can still benefit from this?
I would think anybody could if they presented it the right way. Like, I mean, if you just have a tip jar and you're not promising them anything, then, you can just put it out there and see what happens. I think a lot of people are embarrassed to be at the beginner level. Like, nobody wants to be on there and have 3 patrons or something, but you have to start out with 3 and then get 5 and then get 12 and then get 20. And it does grow slowly because you're asking people to sign up for a monthly bill, and that's a different kind of commitment than buying even an expensive single item. But yeah, I mean, I see other authors on there often with kind of a tip jar style thing, and I mean, I guess it depends on how devoted your audience is. I mean, my people get a sneak peek of what I'm writing on every month, and something like that, depending on how interested they are in what you're doing and what's coming up, that doesn't take you any extra time. That doesn't, all it takes is the time to post it. It's not like it requires extra work from you, and that's what I told people too on that forum. Like, if you have to make your reward, well, you don't have to, but I really suggest you make your rewards things that you're kind of doing anyway that don't really cost you extra labor, because otherwise you'll regret it. You'll regret it so much.
It's at a certain point you're losing ground, particularly early on.
Yeah, but most of us make, some stuff that we don't show to our readers, but that we could harmlessly show them and doesn't really cost us any extra labor.
That's certainly true. Okay, so another thing is, I know that for myself specifically, I'm far more likely to get something done if it's for someone else as opposed to if it's for me. So, do you think that like having like people who are literally invested in you on a monthly basis serves as a motivation to keep your output steady?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it would be very embarrassing to tell them I didn't write anything that month.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is we were talking about how like this these people are invested in you. Do you think that having a Patreon page produces a stronger connection with fans, or do you think it just sort of identifies the fans who already have the strongest connection?
For me, I think it identifies the fans that already have the strongest connection, and I do think that for something like Kickstarter, Kickstarter does tend to make people feel more invested in making that big thing happen. But again, you have a community there where people will actually wander by, see an interesting Kickstarter, and sign up for it without any previous history with the author. I don't think that's happening on Patreon. I think that the people that come to Patreon, and I know for myself as a patron, if I'm really into something, I'll suddenly think to myself, I wonder if they have a Patreon, because usually there's some little extras on there, like some little behind-the-scenes stuff. Like there's one author I know that puts he'll be like, this is kind of the background of the writing of this story. Like he'll put that kind of thing up once a month. Again, that doesn't take you. It takes you what, an extra hour to write something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do need to make their search better. But I mean, I would think, I don't know, if your Patreon gets big enough, I'm sure it puts momentum behind your projects because people feel like they're part of the creation of it. But so far, I've found, I'm guessing, if you're under 200 patrons, it's probably just your hardcore fans that just, can't get enough, so they're contributing there.
You can sort of see like how Kickstarter and Patreon would differ, because if there's a really popular Kickstart, then you'll think, oh, this is going to turn out to be a really great product. But if there's a really popular Patreon, basically you're saying is, oh, this guy's making a lot of money. He doesn't need to make any more money. Like they have opposite thoughts in the human mind.
You think?
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes I think success begets success. Like if people see it's a popular thing, they're like, well, that must be fun to be involved in.
I guess everybody wants to be on the winning team.
Yeah.
All right, and one last bit here. Again, because I've been following Patreon for a while, mostly for artists, there's a few iffy practices and security concerns that have cropped up with Patreon. On the patron side, there's folks who contribute just long enough to get a perk and then drop out. And from what I've heard, it sounds like you haven't seen too much turnover in that regard.
No, I have not. I have had so what my $20 perk, and nobody's contributed more than $20 a month so far, is that we draw them as a Shelt. So a Shelt is a kind of character in my world in the Panamandora universe, and they get a image of themselves as one of these creatures, and it's kind of fun. So I have had one person donate at that level and then back down later. But it was my impression, and actually he's raised his pledge again. It was my impression that that person should never have been donating at that level. So I think what happened, at least with my audience, with my N of 47, right? My experience is that what happens more often is you tempt people to a level that they can't really afford. So don't. It's better. It's far better if you can find a reward that's a low-grade ongoing thing. If you give them a big single one-shot deal for being at a certain pledge level, that can very easily go wrong. And for me personally, my artist actually does those for me for like $15. So so it actually I make up. I don't end up out of pocket for those, even if they pledge 1 month and disappear. But I think that more likely people are simply being tempted to pledge something they can't truly afford, because you want them to not even miss that amount of money out of their bank account. Like you want it to be for whatever their income level is. You want it to be such a small amount that they don't even think about it coming out of their bank account. If they notice it, they've probably overcommitted.
Yeah. You want to get a comfortable spot in their budget. I think that's another reason people don't tend to back down once they find their level, because once you've got your monthly budget, it's your monthly bills. You pay them every month. You don't decide you're going to back down on your electric that month. So I think that might be part of the psychology behind sticking with a pledge. But the last bit I have here is there was a big brouhaha recently. I guess it's sort of ongoing, where people were leaking the artwork of Patreon runners that had sort of a paywall for artwork, because art should be free, and which translates, I suppose, to artists should not be paid. Have you been struck by this at all on yours, or have you heard of any other text type people having that happen?
Well, that's got to be. I'm guessing that's a good problem to have, because that's got to mean you're like ultra successful, and
You got a
people who are
target on your
only
back.
marginal fans who are not really loyal are like wandering into your, into your private little house. No, I've not had a problem with that, and I think that's probably a mark of success. They have recently had let's see, they sent us an email recently to tell us that some of our personal information had been stolen.
Yep, I got that one.
So they're like, no credit cards, no credit cards. Maybe you should change your password. Not that any passwords were stolen. So I don't know if that's just growing pains. Nothing horrible has happened to me yet. They had something else. For a while they were having, cards were being declined for a reason on their end. So pledges weren't 1 month. There was like this thing where they had to like run some people's cards twice, and the pledge bounced back to the patron, and the patron said, but the card is fine, and I want to give you money.
Yeah.
So they got that straightened out. I think they're kind of a small company and still evolving. Like, I didn't jump on them the first year because they were obviously so wet behind the ears, and even now, like, stuff on the site will move around unexpectedly. Things will move into different menus, and it's usually improving, but they're definitely not done evolving yet.
Yeah, it's tricky to get invested in a thing like this early on. There was a sort of a proto Patreon called Subbable that I think Patreon eventually ate. It'd be tricky if you built up a huge following on Subbable and then it sort of vanished on you.
Yeah. I heard recently about a lot of the podcasts had this thing sort of like Patreon called Joyride, and that recently folded. Like, one of the podcasts I listened to, they're like, guys, thank you so much for supporting us on Joyride, but it's gone, so could you please now go support us on Patreon?
It's a very difficult thing to do. It's like trying to get people to carry over to another mailing list.
Yeah.
All right, well, that concludes my questions for this bit, so I'm going to hand you off to Jeff now for a few more.
Okay, Abigail, I've got a question for you. I have several questions for you, but how long have you been on Patreon now?
Since, let me think, 6 months.
6 months. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
No, if you knew then what you know now about Patreon, would you actually still continue to sign up? I mean, I was wondering, do you think any Tom, Dick, and Harry that is an author, artist, whatnot, could feel like, okay, I'm just go ahead and start up a Patreon account and expect to be successful?
If I knew then what I know now, would I still have funded the comic through Patreon?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Nothing unexpected has happened. Like, there hasn't been anything. And I studied quite a bit before I did that. Like, I had my artists do little individual chibis for each of the patronage levels, like, because I knew people responded better to pictures. Like, I spent a while doing some research, so nothing has cropped up that I was like, oh gosh, that's astonishing. I didn't know that was going to happen. Like, it's pretty much gone the way I thought it would go.
So do you think anybody could start one and have a reasonable modicum of success with it?
I think if you've got an existing audience, you could. If you have a following. If you don't have an audience, you're not going to find one on Patreon.
So you really, if you're brand spanking, like an author case, if you're brand spanking new author, you probably ought to hold off until you at least get some sales, get some followers, fans, that sort of thing, because that's kind of what I'm hearing here is like, you don't want to jump in their feet first, like you first publish your novel, let's go ahead and start a Patreon account and get the next one going. It's like, I don't think it would work so well.
Yeah, well, assume that 1 to 2% of your audience will follow you there. So if you don't have an audience of, I don't know, several thousand at least, you're probably not going to I mean, nothing horrible will happen to you. Nobody will come to your house and break your hands. You'll just have 3 patrons, which is not the worst thing in the world. Like I said, I think a lot of people are afraid of looking silly right out of the gate. But yeah, no one comes to your house and breaks your hands. You just takes a while.
Okay, so knowing you have people contributing financially to you every single month, do you find yourself pressured to work even harder so that you can provide updates on a more frequent basis?
They are contributing for something very specific. So they're contributing, their expectation is that we will have a comic page every other week, which we have. If Ra fell behind on the comic, I would be beating down her door or getting a new artist. I mean, that would certainly make me uncomfortable. But we've got a lead of like 2 months worth. I don't know. The lead varies, but we're well ahead of where we have to be. So at the upper levels, that Patreon ends up also paying for things related to my book. So the milestone goals are very specific. They say what we're going to cover. At a certain point, the comic goes to weekly. At a certain point, it goes to color. Based on increasing amounts of money. At a certain point, so right now, so I used to podcast all my novels for free. That was a labor of love and tremendously labor intensive and very expensive. I did a 300,000 word book, epic, full cast. I can't afford to keep doing that, and they know that, and we've talked about this before. Not we, my audience, and I've talked about this before. Like, they want me to keep doing it, I can't. So the last one, I podcast the whole thing for free temporarily. It wasn't full cast, but it was a very good voice actor, and I did the whole Hunter's Unlucky was entirely free in my podcast feed. And then after it ended 2 weeks later, I pulled all but the first third of the book from the feed. And I probably will not do another, and I told them I'm probably not going to do a whole other novel free. So, but if the Patreon hits a certain level, I will go back to podcasting the entire thing for free. If they want to pay for my production costs up front, then I'll podcast the whole thing, for free, for upcoming novels. So those are the kind of expectations I'm setting up. A regular comic, if they hit a certain amount. Free audiobooks, but you tell them the milestone goals, and your Patreon tells them what it is you're promising them. So your question is, do I feel pressure to produce more content? Well, no. I mean, I had a backlog coming out of the gate. I didn't start with nothing in my pocket. But so far, I don't feel that I've overcommitted as far as the amount of content that we can produce. And if they want to pay me a lot more money, I can also step it up. Like, it has to be scalable too, right? You can't promise them something you can't deliver.
Right. So it sounds like as long as you spell out exactly what you're providing, and they know what they're getting into, they should be all right with it. Because I said the next question I had was, and I probably don't need to ask it, but I'll even say it anyways, is have the subscribers ever insinuated that you should be doing more than you already are? And my guess is if they know exactly what they're getting, they shouldn't.
No. And in fact, you have a certain number of people, at least in my audience, and I've found this to be true in the past, who just want to support you, and you're like, I have stuff to give you, and they're like, that's nice, I really just wanted to give you money. You're like, but I have stuff, and they're like, yeah, I've enjoyed your stuff in the past. So like, only, I would say, I don't know, maybe half, 2/3 of the audience is seriously invested in the free stuff, and there's a quarter of them, a third of them, half of them, I don't know, that just want to support you and give you money. So also, your perks, I have several different kinds of perks, and I can definitely tell that a certain segment of the audience is invested in them, and certain segment of the audience really doesn't care. But they all want to put money in my pocket, so that's fine. Yeah.
Good deal. All right, so the last question I have for you is something, and as observation, I've noticed it's been all over the news in recent times where people that have created Kickstarters or public funding campaigns to do whatever are under intense scrutiny to account for every dime used. Have you ever felt that way with your own Patreon account?
No, and Patreon really makes a point of being patronage. Like, they go out of their way in their materials for creators and for donors to emphasize that their intent is that you're that the person is giving patronage. So it's not a store. And if you make it a store, if you try to make your Patreon into a store, you will regret it. Like, there's much better venues, there's much better platforms selling things to people. So you don't want to set it up in such a way that your goal is not to give them their money's worth. It's not like they give you $5 and then you give them $5 worth of content. The idea is that they want to give you money so you will keep making things. And in some cases, some of the Patreons are very, very much set up to, like, here is how much I need to pay my rent. Here is how much I need to pay my, electric bill. Like, some of them are set up very much that way. And I think people donating on Patreon kind of recognize that. So that is also a nice difference between Patreon and Kickstarter, in that people don't usually do Kickstarters to, like, support me while I draw a comic. Like, it doesn't work like that. The Kickstarter is to produce one specific thing, and the money is all supposed to go to produce that thing. Whereas, Patreon is more about supporting artists, and it's not about if you set up your Patreon with the idea that you must give them their money's worth, I think you're misguided. I think what you want is a store on your website, which there's great platforms for that. Like, Patreon's not the right one.
So essentially, it's just for people to keep encouraging you to doing what you're doing, essentially.
Yeah. People who want you to keep doing what you're doing, and to help that happen, and in exchange with, like, some behind the scenes peeks.
Okay, good deal. Alrighty, let me hand you back over to Lindsay, and she's got some questions for you about some other income streams and marketing tactics.
Yeah, we thought we'd talk about a few more things than Patreon on the show here. It's been really great information, though. I hope people will find it useful, because I'm kind of curious and tempted to start something myself, but I don't want to be greedy either. I don't want them to say, like, you've talked about that you make a pretty decent income already on your blog. Why would we give you more money? I don't know.
They're not. It's not like you're holding a gun to their head. And I mean, if you want to do it like I've done it, then start a new project that you wouldn't do otherwise if not for the Patreon. Because I can't afford to pay for a comic out of pocket. I can't. But they're paying for it. They're paying for it entirely. And then when it's done, I'll sell it. So it'll all be fine.
That does sound really. I've never done a comic. Do you have any tips for, like, an author who would want to get into that? That sounds like it'd be kind of fun.
There are tons of really good artists. Tons of them who don't make that much money. Yeah, it's make friends with them on DeviantArt. Do a few illustrations. Do a few character sketches for your audience. See how it goes. There's a lot of really amazing artists that don't make nearly enough.
Do you have to write in any particular way? Do you write it kind of like a short story? I assume it's different than, like, the 300,000 word novel a little bit.
So we hadn't. Ra and I have worked together a lot, but we had. So Sarah Cloutier is the person who is my artist. She goes by Ra online. So we've worked together a lot. We hadn't worked together on a comic before. She has done comics before. She's done several. She has been the artist for other online comics. So. We decided to start with one of my short stories, and before jumping into the main caricature storyline. So this is also an established, this is a novel series that has been out there, and that she has illustrated in the past. So we started with the short story, and we're kind of working out some of the kinks. So she sends me the pages, like, way in advance, and I'll be like, that character has the wrong kind of tail, and the wording here is kind of awkward. Yeah, I write about. So Lindsay, I read your most recent blog post. And if you think it's hard to sell science fiction romance, try selling fantasy romance with animal people.
I have myself muted so the audience doesn't know I'm cracking it back here. Just like, no, I don't like that tail. Don't need 2 forks on that tail.
That person has the wrong kind of tail. No, that was actually my comment on one of the pages. And she makes these corrections, and it's black and white comic. It's very pretty. I've been flattered that several people have immediately started commenting that, oh dear, one of the goals is to go to color. We don't want it to go to color. It's really pretty in black and white. And I'm like, I'm sure we can work out something else. Like, we can go twice a week if we make it to the color goal, if you don't want it to be in color. But, it's just kind of, bounces back and forth a little bit. And she, like I said, she's done comics before. She's laid out comics in the past. Another thing that you could do is, if you like web comics, approach a web comics artist that you enjoy. So that person knows not just how to draw, but how to lay out comics, because they're doing it. And then talk to them. You might be really shocked at how cheap it is. Like, you might be really surprised. And you work out a deal, do like a short story as a test run, and if it doesn't work out, you've still got some really beautiful promotional art.
All right, well, I'm definitely intrigued, so we'll have to see if I can find the time to to get some tales illustrated. But thank you for going over that. That's not really what I had planned to ask you, but maybe some other people will be curious too. And I think it's a good point too, where you're saying like, you're in a really small niche, especially when you're doing stuff for children or people that don't usually buy an ebook form. It's really hard as a self-published author to make any money. I mean, I know I've got the middle grade short stories out there that I started with that don't sell anything, and so I think that's when like Patreon or something else can be really particularly helpful. I would say it's like when you're not doing urban fantasy that's just like Jim Butcher or something like that. That's easy to, well, not that it's easy to sell ever, but that falls into a like a popular trope, I guess. But I was kind of curious.
Gay fantasy romance. Try selling that.
Yeah, we'll get some people on to talk about some of the smaller niches, the challenges, because there definitely are challenges when there's not an Amazon category that you can firmly put yourself in. All right, next question. You kind of talked about audiobooks and audiobooks in the beginning. I did audiobooks myself just as a way to put something out there for free to get the first couple books out there and hopefully find a fan base. Did you find that you were able to find more people that way? Is audiobooks still a useful way to find fans, do you think?
I don't know. I built my audience that way, and there's part of me that really wonders what would have happened if I hadn't found audiobooks and if I had jumped straight into ebooks. Because not only did I do free audiobooks, I did full cast free audiobooks. And I was one of the only people podcasting at the time that actually finished my full cast epic. It's a 5-book series. It's all done in full cast. And I did get some really devoted fans out of that. And I also worked with and met a ton of voice actors, some of whom have gone pro at this point. The guy who did Hunter's Unlucky, the one that Audible picked up recently and did a sale on, he's one of the people that I knew from my full cast days, and I knew he was really, really good and that he would do a good job on that book. And most of the stories that I have, I'm like, oh yeah, I know who could voice that, who would do a really good job on that. I know this person, and I know how much I need to pay them. I know what's reasonable, and I know exactly how much work it is because I've done it. So it gave me a big leg up in audio, and I like audio, and I'm still like I sell more in audio than anywhere else. But as far as like now, I don't know. I don't know. What is your opinion?
I kind of fell out of, well, with audiobooks, I lost my narrator after the first 3, so that just was kind of a place where maybe I'll just stop and rethink things a bit. A couple of years ago, they changed, so they started putting out all the chapters at once. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I got started, it was like you could do it one a week or something like that. And I felt that people really got into that, following it like a weekly radio drama kind of thing. And so it lost some of the appeal for me when they switched to, we're just going to publish the whole thing at once, and it's out there. Maybe the listeners like that more, but I don't know, I just felt like people were really more invested when it was like, oh yeah, next week's installment is going to be great,
Yeah, there's so much more invested. That's why I still podcast the most recent one, even though I didn't leave it perma-free, because what happens is, if they like it, it's like a virus, right? Like everything's in biology terms to me. So it's like a virus. If the virus is too virulent, it will burn itself out. It'll kill the victim before they can infect another person. But if it's like sort of chronic and not so deadly, that victim will live long enough to infect another person. So a book that people listen to in podcast form that's released weekly, it stays in their head for a long time. They're not allowed to just consume it all at once like they would like to do. Like maybe they would like to listen to the whole thing in 2 days, but they're not allowed to. So it's stretched out over this long period of time, and they talk about it more and they think about it more. And if you let them consume it all at once, then it's not quite as effective, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I do think that I don't know how to say this nicely. Sorry, I'm reading the chat now. There are a lot of people listening to podcasts who can't afford to pay for things. And I don't mean that in a mean way at all. Like, there's a lot of people that are disabled or who are retired and living on tiny budgets, or they're in grad school right now, or they're in college right now, or they are a teenager right now, and they just don't have a lot of disposable income, and that's why they are self-selecting for free audio. And I built my original audience from those people, and it took me a long time to begin to disengage from that mindset of everything must be free, or it must be free in some version, because I knew I was leaving people behind, and that sucks. But you know, I do want to make money at it, and I know that people will buy it, so I have to do things that get it in front of people that have disposable income. And I've left all of my free stuff in the free space. Like, you can still listen to all of those novels I did for free, so I haven't pulled them from that space. I will if Audible tells me I have to, but they haven't, and I just don't say anything. They don't worry about it. But I don't think that now it's probably the very best place to go to build a paying audience, but I could be wrong, because I'm not starting out now. I don't know. I still see new novels being released there.
All right. Well, I'm kind of curious too with Audible, because I did not get as good of a royalty rate because I had the free audiobooks out there at the same time. This was probably back in 2012 or 13. We were talking to them. And now I'm doing them through ACX, and I get the better royalty rate because it's exclusive. Amazon always wants you to be exclusive. Did you have that same experience, or did you just not like say that they're out there and we won't out you on the show?
Free is actually a gray area, and an Audible rep has actually admitted that to one of my friends. And non-perma free is an even grayer area. Yeah, my books are only my audiobooks are only for sale on Audible. So yeah, not only do I also got the escalator, because I signed them all up as soon as they were going to change the royalty rate. I signed everything up that I had an ebook version of. So Hunters, that just was in the sale, is now like several steps up their escalator from 50%. But when I look at the numbers, it would still be worth it at 40%. Like, I don't know what other big venue there is out there for paid audiobooks. Before ACX came on the scene, I did sell some audio content off my website, and fulfillment is just a nightmare. Like, it's just, those big files are so not easy to do. And sometimes I see like new authors saying online, "Oh, we're not gonna go exclusive with ACX. We'll just sell it off our website." And I'm like, you have never tried to sell an audiobook off your website before. Even a short story is a challenge. You want to sell something big, like something that's 10 hours long, the bandwidth alone that will be required, especially if you're successful, will be a nightmare. So it's just not that easy to do on your own off your website, and there's no other big place where people come to look for audiobooks. So yeah, ACX and Audible are, if you want to make money on audiobooks, I wouldn't do anything that would keep you from getting on there.
Yeah, and congratulations on your 2,200 books. I was just thinking, I'm like, even a couple hundred a month of a title is some pretty good money from Audible. So that's awesome, and hope it continues to go well there.
Yeah, that book is about 24 hours long. that story. It's an epic, and it cost about $4,000 to pay the narrator for that, which was a fair price. Actually, it's like $4,400. And so I was expecting that book to pay off its cost of production over about 3 to 5 years, and it was on track to do that. You know, it was steadily paying off its cost of production, and then it paid them off in 5 days, 8 months after release. So I was really happy about that. That was awesome.
All right, if any Audible people are listening, I'm ready to be featured in your store. So.
Awesome.
All right, well, we've been chatting for a while, so let me hand you over to the guys. I think they have a couple more questions for you, too. I hope you don't mind staying a little bit longer with us.
Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you.
I'll zip through mine rather quickly. A lot of the stuff I was going to ask about has sort of been covered. On the subject of your artist and of webcomics, how did you talked about finding people on DeviantArt? That's how I found my cover artist. How did you get paired up with your current artist? Like, where did your relationship start?
I had admired her art for a while, and I liked the comic that she drew. And this was back in 2007 when I was writing Guild of the Cowrie Catchers. I wasn't even quite done with it. And I emailed her and asked whether she would be willing to do some illustrations for my book. And this was just for me. Like, it was just for me and my friends that I wrote for. And I was planning on buying like 1 or 2. And she is very smart, and she said sure, and she sent me back sketches for like 10 different scenes, and they were gorgeous. And she was like, pick which one you want me to finish. And I was like, all of them. and so I bought some illustrations for that book, and then I bought some illustrations for the next book. This is a 5-book series, and it was just, like I said, it was just for me. It wasn't for anybody. It wasn't for an audience. And then let's see. Then I got into podcasting, and then I thought, what I have never heard of before is an illustrated podcast novel. That would make me stand out. So I paired. I had one illustration for each episode of the podcast. So it was full voice cast, music, sound effects, and it was illustrated. And that was pretty cool. And then when ebooks came around, I was like, illustrated novel. Which, as it turns out, like I said, I do think they improve people's retention rates, people's excitement about the story, but nobody understands illustrated novels for grown-ups. That was very confusing to many people. So I finally taken it out of the description, and people will still comment like, wow, they won't say illustrated, they'll be like, the beautiful color plates that came with the story were very enhancing. But if you say illustrated novel for grown-ups, people either think it's porn or they're just not sure what to do with it. It must really be a kid's book. So, and it's hard enough when you have talking animals in an adult book, to make people understand that it's for grown-ups. So anyway, I've kind of downplayed that, but they are really, really pretty, and the art book is really pretty. So I don't know, by the time she was doing illustrations for book 3 or 4, I knew that I would be putting them in a paid book. But it was kind of it was a process. And then she's done all of my cover art. I have usually I have little species flow charts in my book. She does those for me. I have a good bit of interior art even in the books that aren't actually illustrated. So I have another guy who does my maps. I have a different person who does my maps. He does my maps and my cover design, typography, stuff like that. Like my upcoming book has an airship in it. He's doing a diagram of the airship. But so I do work with a couple of different artists. Many artists, especially if they haven't really made it yet, they probably are not charging as much as they should. So if you start working with an artist and you pay them a little bit more than what they're asking, they will think you are the most wonderful person in the world. So if you overpay them just a little bit, that's a really good way to make them like you. And usually they're undercharging. What else? Yeah, and we're still working together. We've been working together for quite a while. I would love to be making enough money to actually pay her bills and and have her not have a day job, but so far that hasn't happened yet. But maybe someday.
Yeah, I commission art fairly routinely from artists, and I find that the issue isn't finding good artists, but finding artists who are consistently able to do things for me, because either they just don't, like, finding time in their schedule is tricky. So like that's the only thing that stopped me from having a sort of ongoing episodic art thing going on.
Artists are flaky.
I
And
have
I
used that
mean
exact phrase on this show, I think.
in the nicest possible way, because I've worked with so many of them, and I love visual art, but I have not worked with a one of them that was not a little bit flaky. So be patient, be gentle. I like MCA Hogarth. Her Three Jaguars comic just came out as a paperback. It is a wonderful, hilarious comic about doing a small business. She splits herself into a marketer, an artist, and a business manager. And of course, artists, business manager, and marketer are always having to like rein in and control artists who's seeing visions and wandering off into the woods and stuff. And and that is definitely an artist. So yeah, there have been times when my artist has gotten depressed, and I have waited months and months and months for things. If I had blown up and said we're never working together again, that would have been a huge mistake, because we wouldn't have a comic now. I have found, so for me, I don't know if you guys are like this since you're writers, but for me, I really like to make my own deadlines. I don't like other people telling me when to finish things. I've found for most artists, you sort of have to give them a deadline, and you can't say, like, finish this when you get around to it. Like, you need a hard deadline, and then they tend to work a little bit better.
Yeah. As I recall, actually, I think my phrasing was, I'm not going to say artists are flaky. I'll say it's easy to find a flaky artist.
No, they're all flaky. It's just part of being an artist, I think.
I have a bit here about full cast recordings, but you sort of covered that while it's notable, it's very hard to get your money back on those. I've had people ask me for those. However, I do know full cast recordings have entirely different rights than single narrator. So I know that you can actually do a full cast separately from an exclusive single narrator one. So just a little piece of information maybe people can make use of. But my last question would be: is you've got webcomics, you've got audiobooks, you've got traditional books, illustrated things. It's a pretty big variety of products. Do you find it difficult to market effectively when you've got such a broad range?
Oh, probably. Only someone analyzing I would say that's definitely true. Yeah.
I imagine such.
Don't all of us though? Like who has more than like 2 series doesn't have something that's neglected and could probably be better marketed?
Yeah, it's very true. I feel like 2 series is probably the sweet spot, and I at this point probably have about 5 different things going on. So people only know about 2 of them. So clearly, I'm not doing a great job.
Yeah,
and I will now hand off to the next person, because I don't want to dig my I'm a bad marketer hole any deeper than I already have.
All right, let's see here. Yeah, I had a question regarding the full cast recording too, but you actually answered that one, so we can skip that one. You mentioned that you started tinkering with the Facebook ads. I was just wondering, we've heard from multiple authors telling us that some are in favor, because and others that say they aren't worth their time and the money. So my question to you is, what is your opinion of them thus far? Is it worth it?
So far, I love them.
Really?
Yeah, you had Mark Dawson on. He's like my current guru. Yeah, so I started playing with them about 3 weeks ago, and I gave myself a $200 budget, and I said, if I'm not getting reliable results after $200, either I am bad at this, which is definitely a possibility, or my audience doesn't click on Facebook ads. And I don't want it possible, right? Because he's writing in thriller, and he's writing in the dead center of thriller. I am writing in fantasy, and I am writing so far from the center that I can't even see it. So I don't think all of his tactics are necessarily applicable, and would not be applicable to, say, Lindsay's, science fiction, romance, science fiction. But enough of it was applicable that I could take what he said and buy about. I'd spent about $60, and I started getting some results. I was like, okay, I'm on the right track. And by 100, 120, I was getting consistent, decent results out of one ad. And by the time I'd spent $250, I was getting decent results out of 2 ads. And I've kind of refined those and tinkered with them a bunch, and I think now I'm just going to I've got to see what these people do, right? I've got to see whether they behave the same way as other people on my mailing list. But yeah, it's crazy fun. Like, it brings out all of my gambling tendencies. Like, I don't want to write, I don't want to eat, I don't want to sleep, I just want to play with these Facebook ads.
I haven't heard anyone liken it to gambling before, but that's interesting.
Oh, it's like day trading. So you can even put an app on your phone where you can look at them like minute by minute, which is terrible. So like I'm in the operating room, right, during a long case, and I'm like, turn that ad off. It's not performing properly. Oh, only women are bidding on that ad. I better fix that audience. You can do this all from your phone all day long. So yeah, it told me a lot about my audience, though. Certain, like, gosh, let's see, I don't want to drone on and on. There's 2 covers for Hunter's Unlucky. I commissioned a paper book cover and an ebook cover because it's my opinion the ebook covers benefit from great simplicity, but sometimes it's nice to have the more fancy, all the elements that you get in a paper cover. And for that particular series, because, I don't know, there's many things about it that are special to me, so I did 2 different covers for that series. Well, I personally think that the ebook cover is much prettier, but the paper cover performs way better in ads. And it was so interesting to me that I was like, I might start trialing covers here, because where else can you get 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 virgin eyeballs on a selection of covers and do a true controlled trial? Like, where else can you do that? Because if I send them out to my audience, they want to see their favorite character. They want to see their favorite element. Like, that's not the same as somebody who's never seen your book before. So it would be a really great way to trial covers. And yeah, I do have, so at this point, I've got 2 ads that are bringing in 10 to 18 new subscribers each per day on a $10 budget a day. And if those people, if they are indeed my target audience, they are worth way more to me than $1 to 50 cents. People who like my books tend to go through and buy my entire catalog. So, and I've never been able to do this before. Like, my audience is very niche, and so I always just had to wait for them to find me. I've never had a way to find them. So this is very cool to me, and I'm kind of waiting to see how it'll play out. My mailing list was 420. I got started way too late on mailing lists before this, and now it's up to almost 700 in about 3 weeks. So I'm hoping I'll have 1,000 of them before I launch my next book, and then I want to kind of see what they do. But yeah, it's fun. It's very distracting. You can spend a lot of money really fast.
I can just imagine, like, oh, let's do this. Oh, let's do this. Yeah, if you're really trying to be productive and get the writing done, like, okay, hands off the iPads, hands off the phones, stay away from that. So that'd be my problem with it. So my final question I have for you is, seeing how you have such a wide variety of products available for sale, is there any of them that's either harder to sell or, in hindsight, not worth the time or effort to do?
Illustration in adult books is definitely not going to pay off, so I did that because I love it. Although I say it's not going to pay off, but in fact, it has paid for itself over the course of like 8 years. Not worth doing. I don't know about the kids' books yet. I know. I'm certain that to be successful with that series, I will need at least half a dozen of them. And so far, people like them, but they don't buy them in a sufficient quantity to pay for their cost of production outside of 5 years. So I don't I'm probably I don't know. I need to write about 4 more of them, and then we'll see. That definitely is something that I would need a series to know whether it's going to be effective or not. And maybe I spend all that time and it still doesn't sell very well. Let's see. What else?
Yeah, I've heard that getting into like the young kids books it's really cool, and once you take off, it's very lucrative, but it's hard to get it going.
Yeah, yeah, and at least they're not middle grade. Like I think middle grade would be particularly difficult because at that point the child is selecting their own book,
And they
but
want something that's interesting to them.
they have no pocket money. So at least
Very
like for
true.
the kids, yeah, for the kids' books, the parent is selecting that book, and I know how to appeal to adults. And then I think at least some kids seem to also think the book is appealing to them. But I think when in middle grade you've got an audience that has no pocket money, but they want to pick their own stuff. Like that's got to be a hard audience to market to. I'm trying to think of an answer to your question. I do a lot of things that I really enjoy, and that they take a long time to pay out or to become lucrative, and I always knew I wanted to do that. That's why I went into anesthesia. I knew it would be compatible with writing books, and I knew that I could, as a travel anesthetist, you're well paid, for doing some things that are kind of hard, and I have the for a year, and make a 6-figure salary and write books. So I'm very patient, and I can afford to be patient, and I can afford to put money in things up front that will take a while to pay out, and But
Hey,
I don't.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Don't illustrate your adult books. That's all I've got. If you need to make money quickly.
All right, good. Yeah, and apparently don't release them on April 1st. We know that too. But, all right, that wraps up my questions. Let me hand you back over to Joe, and he can wrap things up for us.
Yep, this is normally Lindsay's job, but I pulled the straw today, so we're going to just close off with a few questions we ask most guests, which is, do you have any just last tips for authors? Little things they can try? Or perhaps we've covered it all.
Say what?
Or perhaps we've covered it all.
Do you have any other tips for other authors or anything? Or?
I'd try Facebook ads. Okay, here's my tip. Don't give an ad more than a $5 budget until you see whether it's going to do anything. Yeah, $5 budget, and don't change more than one variable at a time, or when it starts working, you won't know why it worked.
Well, yeah, that's just bad science if you do it otherwise. And where can people find you and your books?
AbigailHilton.com. You can find my books at all the usual vendors and on Audible, and my comic is on my website.
Very cool.
All right. Well, it was a great chat. I think we learned a lot, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for all the info.
Thanks. Have a great night.
So long.